The wind was a blade cutting across the high dark of Juniper Ford. It came down from the sawtooth peaks with a sound like a grieving woman, carrying the first ice of the season. This was not the soft, blanketing snow of December. It was a hard, granular frost that scraped the boardwalks and rattled the false fronts of the dry goods store. High on the bluff, overlooking the town, the church of St. Augustine stood dark against the bruised purple of the sky. Its bell, a heavy iron burden brought overland by ox cart 20 years prior, was not ringing. It was being battered by the wind, emitting a dull iron clang that was half warning, half surrender. The sound rolled down the empty street, past the saloon, past the land office, and died near the frozen banks of the shallow ford that gave the town its name. There, on the topmost step of the church, a woman was curled against the oak doors. She looked less like a person and more like kindling stacked for a fire that had been forgotten. Her dress, perhaps once a pale blue calico, was shredded at the hem and shoulder, streaked with alkali dust and something dark. Her feet were bare, tucked beneath her thighs, the skin a mottled white and red against the frozen granite step. She was shivering with a violence that seemed impossible to sustain. In her left hand, she clutched a sheaf of papers, pressing them to her chest with a desperation that ignored the cold eating into her bones. Her name, though no one in Juniper Ford knew it, was Anza Calder. The clop of a single horse, shod for the hardpan, broke the rhythm of the wind. The rider was Abram Whitlock. He was a tall man, made taller by the long coat and the weary slope of his shoulders, the owner of the modest Whitlock Gulch Ranch. Abram was a man defined by the silence of his valley and the memory of a wife taken by fever 3 years gone. He pulled his horse, a sturdy bay gelding, to a halt. He saw her first as a shadow, a bundle of rags left by a beggar. Then the horse shifted, and the weak yellow light from the single oil lamp hanging by the church doors caught the pale gleam of her skin. Abram Whitlock, a man who had not hurried for anything in a long time, stopped breathing. He did not look away. He swung down from the saddle, his boots making a dull thud on the packed earth. The horse snorted, its breath a cloud of white steam. He walked toward the church steps, his spurs muted. He stopped 5 feet from her. She did not look up, her body locked in a tremor that shook her teeth. He took off his hat, a battered felt Stetson, creased by years of sun and worry. He held it in his hand, a gesture of respect offered to the dying or the damned. Then the church door opened, not wide, but just enough for a sliver of warm light and the thin figure of Reverend Ephraim Sutter to appear. Sutter looked not at the woman, but at the man standing over her. "Do not," Sutter said, his voice as dry as the frost. "That is not parish business." Abram looked up, his face hard in the poor light. "She is on your step, Reverend. She was left there by trouble, and trouble will follow," Sutter said. He adjusted the black wool shawl around his shoulders. "I have the parish to protect. We cannot be involved." The door began to close, the heavy oak moving with a smooth, oiled finality. The sliver of light narrowed, leaving Anza in the dark once more before the latch clicked shut. A profound silence settled, broken only by the wind and the desperate, rattling breaths of the woman. Abram stood there for a long moment, the cold biting at his ungloved hand. He looked at the closed door, then down at the woman. He had lived in Juniper Ford long enough to know what that closed door meant. It was the judgment of the town, the rigid, fearful conservatism that valued order above mercy. He stepped forward, ignoring the cold. He unbuttoned his heavy canvas coat. It was lined with sheep's wool, still holding the warmth of his body. He draped it over her shuddering shoulders. She flinched, a small animal sound escaping her throat. "Ma'am," Abram said. His voice was rough, unused. He bent down. He saw the paper clutched in her fist, a blue-white claw frozen around it. He did not try to take it. He slid one arm beneath her back and the other under her knees. She weighed almost nothing. He lifted her. She gasped, a sudden intake of frozen air, but did not fight. Abram turned his back to the church and carried her to his horse. He was risking the thin thread of neutrality he had maintained with the town. Taking in a stray meant taking on her sins, and Juniper Ford was a town that remembered sins. He did not care. He settled her sideways on the saddle, her head lolling against his chest, and mounted behind her, pulling the heavy coat tight around them both. He urged the horse into a steady walk, leaving the cold judgment of St. Augustine on the bluff behind them. They were halfway to Whitlock Gulch, the lights of the town long swallowed by the dark. When she moved, she was not conscious, but some core of her was fighting the delirium. Her lips, cracked and blue, parted. He leaned down, his ear near her mouth, the wind whipping her dark hair against his face. She spoke, the words a bare exhalation, a steam of sound that barely registered. "Water charter," she whispered. "The water charter of Coyote Spring." Abram's blood went colder than the wind. Coyote Spring was the lifeblood of the entire valley. It fed his gulch, it fed the town, and it was the only thing stopping the high desert from reclaiming everything. Her fingers tightened on the papers, still held against her chest inside his coat. Don't let them take it." Her voice died, and she went limp against him. Abram stopped the horse. He looked back, not toward the town, but east, toward the high, flat expanse of Dust Mesa. A pinprick of orange light burned on the horizon. It was not a prospector's fire, not this time of year. It was a watch fire. As he stared, the silhouette of a rider passed in front of it. Then another. He could not see the color, but he knew. They wore yellow kerchiefs, pulled high to mask their faces, the Yellow Rock Regulators. A muscle in Abram's jaw tightened. He knew the man who paid them. He knew the shadow that led them. Luther Dragert, the mining boss whose Yellow Rock claim sat uselessly upstream, and who had tried to dry Abram out with legal threats and barbed wire 2 seasons past. Dragert, who believed the earth only had value if you could bleed it of gold. Abram looked down at the ground near his horse's feet. The light frost made the earth a blank page, and someone had left a signature. It was a horseshoe print, not his own, pressed deep into the dirt. It was unusual, a clipped bar on the left foreshoe, the kind of corrective shoeing a man might use on a prized, heavy-shouldered stallion, the kind of horse Luther Dragert rode. The tracks did not lead from the mesa. They led away from it, pointing straight toward the dark cleft in the earth where Coyote Spring was born. Abram gathered the reins, pulling the unconscious woman tighter against him. The wind howled, and the seed of a conflict that would define the valley had just been sown in the frozen earth. The Whitlock ranch house was not a home of comfort. It was a fortress of solitude. Built of thick boled pine, the logs were chinked tight with mud and straw against the high country wind. It smelled of things that lasted wood smoke from the stone hearth, lye soap, and the sharp, clean scent of curing saddle leather. Abram carried Anza through the door, the wind clawing at his back as if trying to reclaim her. He kicked the door shut, and the silence of the room descended. Maeve Holliday was already there, a pot of coffee held in one hand, her face as rigid as a dry-season creek bed. She was a woman who had buried a husband and 3 sons in this valley, and she held no space for foolishness. She looked at the half-dead woman in Abram's arms, then at his face. "Merciful God, Abram," she said, her voice a low rumble. "You always did pick the hard path." She was on the church steps. "Maeve, Sutter closed the door on her." Maeve's eyes, the color of faded denim, narrowed. "That man would close the door on Christ himself if he thought it would keep the collection plate full. Put her on the settle, by the fire." He laid her down gently. Maeve was already in motion, stripping the frozen, ruined calico from Anza's skin with an efficiency that was almost brutal, yet gentle. She wrapped the woman in a heavy wool blanket and began forcing spoonfuls of hot, sweet coffee between her lips. "Sal!" Abram yelled to his one ranch hand, who was sleeping in the lean-to. "Ride to town. Get Hiram Bell. Tell him it is life or death." Dr. Hiram Bell arrived 2 hours later, his buggy rattling into the yard. He was a man who smelled of stale whiskey and carbolic acid, but his hands were steady. He worked in the pool of lantern light. His movements economical. "She has the frostbite," he muttered, examining her bare feet. "Bad. She might keep the toes. She might not. Depends on the blood." He applied a pungent salve and wrapped them in clean linen. He moved to her arms, unbuttoning the cuffs of the man's shirt Maeve had put on her. He pushed the fabric up past her elbow, and he stopped. "Abram," Bell said, his voice dropping. Abram moved from the shadows. Maeve was already there, holding the lamp higher, encircling Anza's wrists. Stark against the pale, cold blotched skin were raw, purpled grooves. They were rope burns, chafed and rubbed with dirt, so deep they had broken the skin in 3 places. The flesh around her ankles, when Bell checked, was the same. This was not the cold, Hiram Bell said quietly. This was not the wind. This girl was bound, tied up, hard, and for a long time. He looked at the deep bruises on her shoulder, and dragged, by the looks of it. Maeve Holliday's face became granite. "Who does this? Someone who does not fear God," Bell said, "or the law." He gave her a draught of laudanum to blunt the pain and force her into a healing sleep. "Keep her warm. Keep her here. If she wakes, give her broth. I will be back at dawn." Anza woke near midnight. She did not wake with a start, but with a sudden, terrible stillness. Her eyes snapped open, wide and dark in the firelight, pupils dilated with terror. She saw Abram sitting in the chair across the room, cleaning a rifle, and she recoiled, pulling the blankets to her chin. "Where am I?" Her voice was a dry rasp. "You are safe," Abram said. He did not move, keeping his hands on the rifle, slow and steady. "You are at Whitlock Gulch. I found you at the church." "The church!" she breathed. The terror did not fade. It sharpened. She looked around the room, frantic. "The papers. My papers. Here." Abram pointed to the small packet, dried and weighted on the mantel. "I did not read them." She relaxed only a fraction. He rose slowly and brought her a tin cup of water. Her hands shook so violently she could not hold it. He held it for her as she drank. "Who tied you?" Abram asked. Her eyes closed. "The judge. Judge Silas Pike." Abram felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Judge Pike was more than the law in Sawtooth County. He was the pillar of it, a man who spoke of progress, morals, and the manifest destiny of a righteous civilization. "Why? I was his secretary," she whispered, the words painful. "I filed his papers. I saw his ledgers." She turned her head, looking into the fire. "He is partners with Luther Dragert, the Yellow Rock claim. It is all a front. Dragert provides the men, the regulators. Pike provides the law." She swallowed, the pain in her throat making her wince. "The water charter of Coyote Spring. It is an old territorial grant. It guarantees water rights to the ranchers of this valley and a share to the Red Bluff tribe. Forever." Abram nodded. "I know it. You know the one Pike shows in the land office, the one he reads from." Her gaze met his, and it was filled with a desperate, burning intelligence. "It is a forgery, a brilliant one. I found the original by accident, tucked in the county incorporation ledger from 1852. I was supposed to be burning the old archives, but I read it." She described the difference. The original charter was ironclad. The forgery had 2 new clauses, citing state authority in times of drought and reallocation based on mineral priority. "Dragert's mine is dry," Abram said, the pieces clicking into place. "He needs Coyote Spring to wash his ore. He means to take it all." Anza said, "He and Pike, they are preparing to declare a drought emergency. Pike will use the forged charter to seize the spring, and Dragert's regulators will enforce it. They will dry out this whole valley. They will break you." "And you?" Abram asked. "I confronted him. I thought he was just misguided." A bitter, hopeless sound escaped her. "He called me a thief. He had Reverend Sutter declare me a woman of low morals who had tried to extort him. Then he gave me to his regulators to be handled. They tied me. They were taking me to the mountains, but I got away. I ran to the church. I thought he would have to help me." Her voice broke. Abram looked at this woman, at the rope burns and the frozen feet, and he felt the hollow space in his own chest finally catch fire. He had been a dead man walking for 3 years, ever since the fever took his wife. Sarah, he had watched his herd dwindle, had let his fences sag, a man simply enduring the days. He was done enduring. He heard Maeve's heavy footsteps. She had been listening from the kitchen. "This house is the first place they will look," Maeve said, her voice flat and final. Hiram's buggy was seen coming up the gulch. She looked at Anza, her expression unreadable. "Can you walk?" "I can," Anza lied. "You will," Maeve corrected. She helped Anza up, wrapping her in Abram's heavy coat again. She led her not to a bedroom, but out the back door, into the biting wind, toward the small, dark shape of the grain shed. Inside, it was dry and smelled of oats and canvas sacks. "It is warmer than the church step," Maeve said, arranging a bed of clean tarpaulins and more blankets. "No one comes in here but me or Abram." As Abram turned to leave, Maeve put a hand on his arm. Her grip was like old iron. "You be careful, Abram Whitlock," she said, her eyes fixed on his. "A man only gets one chance to buy back his life. Do not waste this one." The trouble started before the sun was fully up. A thin pillar of smoke rose from the north ridge. It was not a rancher's fire. It was a signal. Abram watched it from his porch. Snake in the grass. Liar's Ride, the Red Bluff Band, warning that the regulators were on the move, pushing boundaries, likely trying to provoke a fight they could blame on the tribe. An hour later, Jonah Creed's wagon rattled into the yard. Jonah was the town blacksmith, a freedman from Tennessee whose shoulders were broad enough to carry the town's suspicion and its need for his skill. He was a man of few words and absolute integrity. He stopped his team and walked to the porch, pulling a piece of leather from his pocket. "Found this snagged on my hitching post this morning," Jonah said, his voice a deep bass. "Right after a half-dozen of Dragert's men rode past." They were riding hard. Abram took it. It was a broken piece of a bridle's cheek strap. The leather was expensive, stamped and oiled, and woven into it with yellow silk thread were the initials REY. "Regulators, Yellow Rock," Abram said. "Or," Jonah replied, his eyes steady. "The judge's town carriage. His man uses the same tack, bought and paid for from the same catalog." He paused. "They are the same animal, Abram, just a different collar. Be watchful." He nodded and left. By noon, the poison had reached Juniper Ford. The word was out Abram Whitlock had taken in the runaway thief from Sawtooth, the woman who tried to blackmail the Honorable Judge Pike. The sound of the Sunday service bell began to toll, carried up the gulch on the sharp, clear air, in the grain shed. Anza heard it. It was not the sound of salvation. It was the sound of Sutter's voice. "We cannot be involved." It was the sound of the heavy oak door clicking shut, locking her out in the killing cold. She curled into a tight ball, her body seized by the same tremors Abram had first seen on the steps, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Abram entered the shed, the dim light falling on her shaking form. He saw her terror, and he understood. This was not the cold. This was the memory of betrayal. He did not speak. He walked to the small crate they were using as a table, where a lantern burned low. He took off his hat, the battered felt brim that had been his only constant companion for 10 years. He placed it on the crate with a quiet, definite sound. Anza looked up, her eyes wide, glistening with the remembered frost. He rang the bell," she whispered, her voice choking. "He rang it after they left me, like a proclamation." Abram looked at her, his gaze unwavering. He pushed the hat an inch forward on the crate, a line drawn in the dusty wood. "He will not ring it for you again," Abram said, his voice low and certain. "From this moment on, you are not alone." The sky was the color of a fresh bruise, purple and pale green at the eastern edge. When they left the grain shed, Abram moved with the long, ground-eating stride of a man who knew his own land in the dark. Anza, her feet wrapped in thick wool and stuffed into a pair of Abram's old boots, walked beside him, her hand gripping the charter papers inside her coat. The cold was a physical weight, pressing the air from their lungs. Coyote Spring was not a thundering oasis. It was a quiet, vital fissure in the limestone floor of a box canyon, 2 miles north of Abram's ranch house. The water, filtered through 1,000 feet of mountain, emerged cold and clear, forming a creek that was the single artery of life for the valley. They saw the stakes before they saw the water. They were new. Raw pine, cut sharp, hammered deep into the ground. They were marked not with the familiar brand of the Territorial Survey, but with the black stenciled letters Y or C, Yellow Rock Claim. They have already claimed it, Anza whispered, her voice hollow. They have marked it, Abram corrected, his voice flat. He walked the perimeter. The stakes formed a perfect, brutal square around the spring's source. This is against the charter, against any law. He stopped, his gaze fixed on a spot 20 yards from the pool. The earth was wrong. It was not the smooth, wind-scoured hardpan of the canyon floor. It was disturbed, the dirt darker, clumps of sod cast aside and poorly replaced. It looked like a fresh grave. Abram moved to the spot and knelt. He pulled his knife and dug at the soft soil. He hit metal. "Help me," he said. Anza knelt beside him, and together they clawed away the dirt. It was not a coffin. It was a heavy iron-bound chest, small and dense, and beside it, half buried, was a complex brass instrument. Abram lifted the instrument. It was a hydrometer, a precision tool with a vernier scale gauge, designed to measure the exact volume and flow of water. "Draegert is not just stealing the spring," Abram said, his voice grim. "He is measuring what he is stealing, for his investors, for the courts." He turned his attention to the chest. It was a miner's strongbox, built to hold gold, and it was locked with a heavy pin tumbler mechanism that was far beyond the skill of a simple rancher to open. Abram tested its weight. It was heavy, not with gold, but with paper. "This is the proof," Anza said, her hand resting on the cold metal. "The maps, the orders. It is a locked box," Abram said. "Proof we cannot use." He hefted the box, and they hid the hydrometer under a pile of loose rock. As the first rays of the sun hit the canyon rim, they were already moving back toward the ranch, carrying the dead weight of Draegert's secrets. They were met in the yard by a lathered horse. A girl, who looked no older than 16, slid from the saddle. She was thin as a whip, with short cropped hair under a newsboy cap. This was Wren Talbot, the fastest courier on the Silver Butte line, a girl who rode where the telegraph wires had not yet dared to go. "Abram Whitlock," she said, breathing hard. She did not wait for an answer. She handed him a folded yellow telegram, flimsy, from the depot at Silver Butte. "Came in an hour ago. Marked urgent." Abram unfolded it. The message was from the territorial capital. "Judge Silas Pike to convene public field hearing. Stop. Juniper Ford Town Square. Stop. Reclamation Day Festival afternoon. Stop. Subject abandonment and forfeiture of Whitlock Gulch deed due to public nuisance and harboring a fugitive. Stop." Abram crushed the paper in his fist. "He is not waiting," he said to Anza. "He is taking the ranch. Today." "He is creating the law," Anza said, her face pale but her eyes burning. "He holds a trial to seize your land, which isolates the spring. Then he uses the forged charter to claim the water. It is all legal. It is all a lie." Abram looked at the strongbox. "We have 2 hours. Get inside, both of you," he said to Wren and Anza. "Wren, you cannot be seen here." He saddled his horse, tied the strongbox to the horn, and rode, not fast, but steady, toward Juniper Ford. The sound of the forge was the only honest noise in town, the ring of steel on steel, the percussive hiss of the steam bellows. Jonah Creed was shaping a wagon wheel rim when Abram walked in, carrying the box. "Judge Pike is calling a hearing to take my land this afternoon," Abram said, placing the box on the anvil. The metal was still warm. Jonah stopped hammering. He looked at the box, then at Abram. "And you think the answer is in here?" Jonah said. "I do, and I think you are the only man in this county who can open it without a key or dynamite." Jonah picked up the box. He turned it over, examining the lock mechanism. "It is a double wafer lock, from back east, crude but stubborn." He went to his tool bench, a massive plank of oak covered in files, calipers, and hammers. He did not have a lockpick. He began to make one. He took a thin, high-tensile steel file, heated it in the forge until it glowed cherry red, and began to hammer it flat, quenching it, hammering it again. He worked with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. In 10 minutes, he had fashioned 2 tools, a narrow tension wrench, and a long, thin rake, its end filed into a serrated edge like the tail of a scorpion. "The scorpion lock?" Jonah murmured, a rare, grim smile touching his lips. He inserted the tension wrench into the keyhole, applying gentle pressure. He slid the scorpion rake in beside it and began to jigging it, feeling the wafers. His eyes closed in concentration, one by one. They heard the faint snick of the tumblers aligning. With a final twist, the lock clicked open. Abram lifted the lid. Inside, there was no gold. There was a detailed surveyor's map, signed by a mining engineer from Denver, showing a planned aqueduct running from Coyote Spring straight to the dry pits of the Yellow Rock claim. Beneath it was a leather-bound ledger. Anza, who had followed Abram into the forge against his wishes, stepped forward. She opened the ledger. Her face went white. "Abram," she said, her finger tracing a line of neat copperplate script. "Look at this." It was a meticulous record of payments. Cash paid for surveying stakes, cash for transport, cash for security. And at the top of the page, the account name, the ministry fund. "That is Sutter's fund." Anza breathed. "For the church restoration, Pike was the treasurer." "It is a payroll," Abram said, seeing the names. "The regulators, even Cade Rusk, $200. "It is a bribery ledger," Anza corrected. "It links all of them. Dragert's money, filtered through Pike and Sutter's ministry fund, to pay the regulators. This proves everything." Abram closed the book. He turned to Jonah. "I owe you." "You do," Jonah said. "You owe me to use that book to stop them." Abram nodded. He and Anza stepped out of the forge into the cold, bright morning, the ledger now in his saddlebag, the map in Anza's hand. They were exposed. The shot came from the ridge above the town. It was not the loud boom of a buffalo gun. It was the high-velocity, splitting crack of a Sharps rifle, a sniper's weapon. Anza saw it first, not the bullet, but the glint of the sun on the long brass scope, high on the hillside. "Abram!" she screamed, lunging, not pulling, but shoving him with all her weight. Abram stumbled backward, falling against the water trough just as the air where his chest had been exploded with a sound like a giant whip. The bullet, a .50 caliber slug, slammed into the hitching post, blasting a fist-sized chunk of pine into the air. Cade Rusk, the man from the ledger. "Get on the horse." Abram yelled, grabbing Anza by the waist and throwing her into the saddle. He mounted behind her, raking his spurs. A second shot kicked up dirt at their horses' feet. They galloped out of the smithy yard, bending low. They were not riding for the ranch. They were riding for the Badlands. They thundered through the center of town, past the shocked faces of townsfolk, past the saloon, and veered hard south, toward the dry wash known as the Arroyo del Sol. It was a scar in the earth, 100 feet wide, a maze of baked clay and alkali dust. Abram plunged the horse down the embankment, knowing it was their only cover. Behind them, they heard the pursuit, 4, maybe 5 riders, the regulators. They rode hard for a mile, the high canyon walls echoing the sound, making it seem like the pursuit was on top of them. The arroyo forked. To the left, a dead end. To the right, open country, where the regulators' faster horses would run them down. Abram pulled his horse to a skidding halt. Above them, on the rim of the arroyo, was his own small herd of longhorn cattle, grazing near the edge. "What are you doing?" Anza cried. Abram pulled his lariat from his saddle, making dust. He spun the rope, a wide, fast loop, and spurred his horse up the shallow embankment. He rode straight at the lead steer, screaming, the rope whistling. The herd, startled, turned as one. Abram, riding like a demon, hazed them, pushing the 300 head of cattle directly over the embankment, straight into the arroyo, right into the path of their pursuers. It was a tidal wave of horn and hoof. The regulators, rounding the bend, were met by a wall of panicked beef, the arroyo filled with a choking cloud of dust, the sound of bellowing animals and cursing men. Abram did not wait to watch. He grabbed his horse's reins, turned hard right, and scrambled up the far side of the canyon, disappearing into the cover of the juniper trees. They rode for an hour, pushing the horse to its limit, until they reached Mission Wash. It was a sheltered place, thick with cottonwoods, a neutral ground where the Red Bluff tribe sometimes came to trade, as if summoned. 3 men emerged from the trees. They were on foot, armed with bows and older rifles. Their leader was a tall, scarred man with graying braids, Chief Palin Ridge. He looked at Abram, at the trembling woman behind him, and at the sweat-lathered horse. He showed no surprise. "You run from the yellow scarves," Palin Ridge stated. It was not a question. "They run this valley," Abram said, dismounting. "They plan to steal Coyote Spring. We have proof." Palin Ridge's face remained impassive, but his eyes were like black flint. "The spring is our water, by the old treaty, the treaty your Judge Pike claims he cannot find. We have the proof," Anza said, sliding from the horse, holding out the mining map. Palin Ridge looked at the map, then at her. "Pike's men say you are a liar, a thief. Pike's men are framing your people." Abram cut in. "They are pushing onto your lands, trying to start a war so they can call in the army and seize the territory. I know it, you know it." Palin Ridge looked north. "My scouts found 2 of my hunters dead, shot in the back, their bodies left near a white man's burned wagon. They are making their own reasons to fight." He met Abram's gaze. "You have paper, I have dead men. Paper does not stop bullets." "This paper does," Abram said. He took the ministry fund ledger from his saddlebag. He held it out. "This is Dragert's payroll. It lists the men who hunt for him. It proves he is paying for the violence your people are blamed for." Palin Ridge took the ledger. He could not read the script, but he understood the numbers. He understood the list of names. This was the weapon he needed. "You give me this?" the chief asked. "I give it as a pledge." Abram said, "We stopped them today. Together. In front of the whole town." Palin Ridge nodded. A slow, deliberate movement. "The Reclamation Day Festival. Our people are forbidden, but we will be watching." He pointed to the highest bluff, the one overlooking the town square. "We will light a fire, a parley fire, 3 smokes, then 2, then 1. It is the sign of talk, the sign of truce." He looked at Abram, his eyes hard. "We will not shoot. Pike's men will not dare shoot at an unarmed man in front of the town. But if they do, if any man breaks the truce and fires first, he will show all of Juniper Ford who the real savage is." The town square of Juniper Ford was a stage set for a hanging. Though the bunting was for a festival, red, white, and blue streamers, already faded by the high country sun, hung limp between the veranda posts of the hotel and the land office. A temporary wooden platform, erected for the Reclamation Day speeches, stood in the center. Judge Silas Pike stood on it, a figure of absolute black-suited authority. His silver hair was brushed back, his face a mask of solemn public service. To his left, a step behind, stood Reverend Ephraim Sutter, his hands folded over his Bible, lending the proceedings a holy, unassailable gravity. The townsfolk were gathered, a restless, uncertain mass. They had come for free barbecue and patriotic speeches, but the air was wrong. It was thin and cold, and it smelled of fear. "We gather today," Judge Pike began, his voice not loud, but carrying a practiced judicial tenor, to celebrate the claiming of this land, a land of law, a land of order. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the crowd. But law and order must be defended. They must be purged of elements that seek to undermine them. He looked toward the alley by the blacksmith shop. Mr. Dragert. Luther Dragert shouldered his way through the crowd. He was not wearing his regulator's yellow scarf, but his presence was just as loud. He stepped onto the platform, his boots heavy. "I am not a man for speeches," Dragert boomed, his voice a gravel slide. "I am a man who builds, a man who brings progress, and I have been sabotaged." A murmur went through the crowd. "My equipment destroyed, my men threatened, and the man who did it stands among you." He pointed, a thick finger singling out Abram Whitlock, who stood quietly at the edge of the square, near Jonah Creed. "He did it," Dragert shouted. "To protect her, a fugitive, a thief he is harboring at his ranch." The crowd divided. Those loyal to the old Valley families looked at Abram with confusion. Those who worked for Dragert's payroll, or who feared him, took up the cry, "Shame! Run him out! He is not the fugitive." The voice was not loud, but it was clear as a bell, and it cut through the noise like a surgeon's knife. Anza Calder stepped out from the shadow of the smithy. She was not the half-dead creature from the church steps. Her feet were in real boots. She was wrapped in Maeve Holliday's plain gray wool cloak. Her dark hair was combed back, and her face was pale, but her eyes were on fire. She walked directly to the platform, stopping at the base, forcing the judge to look down at her. "I am Anza Calder," she said, her voice gaining strength. "For 2 years, I was Judge Pike's senior clerk in Sawtooth County." A collective gasp went up from the crowd. This was not the lying runaway they had been told about. This was an insider, Judge Pike's face. For one brief second, lost its calm. It tightened into something hard and white. "I kept the judge's ledgers," Anza continued, holding up the leather-bound book they had taken from the strongbox. "I balanced his accounts, including the one he called the Ministry Fund." Reverend Sutter took an involuntary step forward. "That is a sacred trust for the church. Then the church must be doing very well, Reverend," Anza said, her voice sharp as ice. "Because I am looking at a donation, logged on October 3rd, from the Yellow Rock claim, for $5,000. The crowd was dead silent. $5,000 was more money than the entire town saw in a year. "And another," Anza read, her finger moving down the page. "A withdrawal, October 5th, for security consultation, paid to Cade Rusk, $200. At the sound of his name, a man prone on the roof of the Juniper Hotel adjusted his position. The sun glinted off the long brass scope of his rifle. "This is an outrage," Pike thundered, finding his voice. He waved a dismissive hand. "This woman is a known thief. She stole that ledger. She stole county property. She is a liar, a runaway from the marketplace, and she will not be allowed to slander this court." His eyes, dark and cold, flicked past Anza, up to the hotel roof. He gave a short, sharp nod. Cade Rusk settled his crosshairs on Anza's chest. "She is not the only one with county property." Abram Whitlock's voice was a low rumble. He walked out of the crowd, carrying the heavy iron strongbox. He did not go to the platform. He dropped it in the dirt, right in the center of the square, with a heavy, final thud. "That is county property," Pike yelled, his control slipping. "Seize it! Seize him!" Before any of Dragert's men could move, Jonah Creed stepped up to the box. In his hand, he held the long, thin steel tools he had forged, the scorpion lock. "Then you will not mind if we look inside, Judge," Abram said. The entire town held its breath. They watched as Jonah knelt, inserted the tension wrench, and slid the rake into the lock. He worked with a focused, silent grace. The only sound was the wind, the snick, snick, snick of the metal inside the lock, and the heavy breathing of Luther Dragert, with a final, sharp click. The bolt threw. Jonah stood. He nodded at Abram. Abram lifted the heavy lid. He reached in, his movement slow, deliberate. He pulled out the brass hydrometer. "This," he said, holding it up, "is for measuring the flow of water that does not belong to him." He reached in again. He pulled out the engineer's map. He unfolded it, a massive sheet, and held it up for all to see. The clean, damming lines of a planned aqueduct, running from Coyote Spring to the dry pits of the Yellow Rock claim. A low, angry sound began in the chests of the assembled ranchers. "And this," Abram said, pulling out the last item, "is the ledger, the one she was reading from, the one that proves Judge Pike and Luther Draggart are using God's own ministry fund to pay for this." The crowd was no longer divided. It was a single, angry entity. "Thieves!" a woman shrieked. "They are stealing the spring." Luther Draggart saw the tide turn. He saw the ranchers reaching for their holsters. He had lost the law. He would use his own. He locked eyes with Cade Rusk on the roof. He made a chopping motion with his hand. Not to retreat, to engage. Cade Rusk lowered his rifle. He picked up a flare pistol. He fired it into the pale afternoon sky. A streak of chemical yellow burst above the town. Showering sparks. It was the signal. "They are in the town," someone screamed. "From the saloon doors. From the livery. From the alleys between the stores. The Yellow Rock regulators emerged. Not just the 4 from the arroyo, but 30 of them. Yellow scarves pulled high. Henry rifles held low. They did not ride in firing. They did something far worse. They shoved their way into the crowd, grabbing women, grabbing old men, pulling children close." They formed a moving, human shield, their rifles leveled over the shoulders of their hostages. The ranchers, Jonah, Abram, they were frozen. They could not shoot. Luther Draggart smiled, a triumphant, ugly curl of his lip. He had the town. Then a new silence fell, a different kind of fear. On the high bluff above the town, the one that held the church, figures appeared. Chief Palinridge stood at the cliff's edge, flanked by his warriors. They were not painted for war. They held no rifles. They simply stood, 30 of them, watching. As the town stared, a small fire was lit on the bluff. A blanket was thrown over it. One column of smoke puffed into the sky. A second column. A third. A pause. 2 columns. A pause. 1. The 3-2-1 signal. The call for truce. The parley. The town square was trapped in a perfect, terrible silence. The regulators held the ground. The red bluff held the high ground. And between them, the people of Juniper Ford waited. No one fired. Draggart's men knew that the first man to shoot at an unarmed truce signal, in front of the entire town, would start a war they could not win. Reverend Ephraim Sutter stepped forward, his hands raised high, his face a mask of pained righteousness. "Peace," he cried. "My children, let us have peace. This is a house of God. This valley, let us talk." He bustled toward the edge of the square, moving as if to mediate, his eyes wide with feigned panic. He stumbled near a small, decorative fire pit that had been set for the festival, its logs smoldering, sending up a thin wisp of smoke. Sutter leaned down, as if to catch his balance. He looked at the smoking log. He saw Wren Talbot, the courier, watching him from the mouth of an alley. He smiled at her, a beatific, calming smile. Then he pursed his lips and blew, a small, precise puff of air that extinguished the glowing ember. A tiny, insignificant act, but it was a signal. The truce wisp was gone. Wren Talbot's eyes narrowed. She saw the act. She saw the lack of accident in it. She saw Sutter look, just once, toward Judge Pike. She did not make a sound. She slipped back into the shadows, her eyes now fixed on the Reverend. Pike seized the moment of chaos. The truce signal was gone. The regulators were in the crowd. The red bluff were on the ridge. "Anarchy!" Pike roared, his voice now a hammer. "The town is under attack from the savage on the hill, and the anarchist in the square. We are beset." He raised his hands, assuming complete control. "For the safety of Juniper Ford, I am declaring a state of public emergency. I am detaining all parties, these armed men." He gusted to the grinning regulators. will act as my temporary deputies to restore order. Seize Whitlock and the woman. They are to be held for their own protection." The regulators leveled their rifles. The rope had tightened. The trap was sprung. They were not taken to the town jail. Judge Pike was too smart for that. The jail was public, answerable to a marshal. Instead, they were marched at rifle point to the town livery, a large, drafty barn attached to the hotel where the regulators had made their barracks. They were shoved into an empty horse stall in the back. The heavy wooden gate was slammed shut and secured with a thick iron chain and a new padlock. One guard, a hulking man from Dragert's mine, posted himself on a stool just outside the stall, his rifle across his knees. The barn was cold, and the air was thick with the smells of horse, damp hay, and curing leather. Through the slats in the wall, they could see the last of the daylight fade, replaced by the yellow, dancing light of torches in the hotel yard. The festival was over, replaced by an occupation. "Pike won," Anza said, her voice flat. She slid down the rough plank wall, pulling her knees to her chest. She was shivering, but not from the cold alone. He had them. He had the guns, the crowd, the law. He had everything. He had the guns, Abram corrected, his voice a low rumble in the dark. He stood by the gate, testing the chain. It was solid. He did not have the crowd, and he does not have the truth. "What does the truth matter?" she whispered. "He'll have us shot trying to escape before dawn and call it justice." He might. Abram agreed. He turned and sat, not close to her, but near, leaving a space of respect between them. "But the proof is not in this stall. Jonah has the ledger. Wren has the map. Palin Ridge has the payroll. Pike has us, but he has nothing. He is a spider in a web with no flies." They fell silent, listening to the sounds of their prison, the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the horses in the nearby stalls, the shifting of hooves on straw, the coarse laughter of the regulators in the hotel yard. And then, a new sound, a gentle patter against the roof, growing stronger. Rain, a cold night rain, drumming a steady, lonely rhythm on the tin roof above them. The sound seemed to sink into Anza. She bowed her head, her shoulders shaking with a deep, silent tremor. The sound of the rain, the inescapable cold, the locked door. It was the church steps all over again. Abram watched her. He saw her not as an ally, not as a political prisoner, but as the woman he had found curled in the dark, the woman Sutter had locked out. He moved quietly, closing the distance between them. He sat beside her on the dusty straw. She did not look up. He did not touch her. He simply took off his hat, the battered felt Stetson, dark with years of weather and work. He held it in both hands for a moment, as if weighing it. Then, gently, he placed it on her lap, setting it directly over her hands, which were clenched white-knuckled on her knees. She stopped shivering. She looked at the hat, then, slowly, up at him. His face was in shadow, but his eyes were clear. "When I found you on those steps," he said, his voice just loud enough to carry over the rain, "I saw a woman this valley had tried to break. I thought I was looking at someone who was finished." He shook his head. A small, definite movement. "I was wrong. What I saw today, in the square, when you walked out and faced them all, that was not a broken woman. That was the single bravest act I have ever witnessed. Pike and Dragert. They have dozens of men with rifles, and they are all terrified of you." He touched the brim of the hat, a light, passing gesture. "He did not break you. Anza, he just showed you what you were made of." Anza looked down at the hat, then at the man beside her, the rough, solitary rancher who had stopped for a bundle of rags. He had seen her at her absolute lowest, and he was the only one who did not treat her like she was ruined. Slowly, she lifted one hand. She did not touch his face. She touched his hand, where it rested on his knee. It was a hard hand, calloused and scarred. Her fingers traced a long, white scar that ran from his thumb to his wrist. "What taught you this?" she whispered, her voice thick. He looked down at their hands. "A bad winter, 4 years ago, fencing in a blizzard. The wire snapped. "It must have hurt," she said. "It did," he murmured. "But it taught me that anything that does not kill you leaves a mark, and that mark is a lesson." "You have them," he said, his gaze moving to her wrists, hidden by the coat. "I have them. They mean we are still here." She did not pull her hand away. She left it there, her fingers light on his scar. The air in the stall changed. The smell of the hay, the sound of the rain, the breathing of the horses, it all seemed to fade, drawing into the small, dark space they occupied. He was looking at her, and his gaze was no longer just respectful. It was something deeper, something that asked a question. He shifted, just an inch, his shoulder brushing hers. The space between them was electric. He did not move further. He waited. Anza looked from his hand to his eyes. She saw the question there. She saw the loneliness that matched her own. She saw the man who had wrapped her in his coat and placed his hat over her heart. She did not speak. She simply leaned her head, just slightly, against his shoulder. It was the only answer he needed. His arm moved, slow and deliberate, settling around her shoulders. He did not pull her. He simply offered the shelter. Anza turned into it, pressing her face against the rough wool of his coat, her hands coming up to grip his shirt. He held her. He held her tightly, a solid, unmoving presence in the cold dark. It was an embrace of desperation, of two people who had been alone for too long, finding a sudden, unexpected anchor. It was warmth against the cold, safety against the rifles, and it was better than fire. He pulled back, just enough to see her face. His hand, the scarred one, came up to cup her jaw. His thumb brushed at the wet track on her cheek. She was not crying from fear. It was the hard, painful relief of finally being seen. He leaned in. The first kiss was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of necessity. It was hesitant, cold air meeting warm breath. It was the taste of rain and dust and the faint, metallic tang of fear. It was trembling, and it was uncertain. Then Anza's hand, which had been resting on his chest, moved. Her fingers tangled in the collar of his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened. It became a different thing entirely. It was gentle, yet it was intense. It was a slow, drowning discovery. It was the desperate, unspoken promise that they were alive, here, now, in this stall, and that tomorrow, whatever it brought, they would not be facing it alone. His other hand found hers, his fingers lacing through hers, calloused skin against skin, a grip that was as strong as the chain on the gate. He broke the kiss, but he did not move away. He rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in a white cloud in the cold air. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart under her hand. "Abram," she whispered, her eyes closed. "I am here," he murmured, his voice thick. He wrapped his coat, the one that still held her shape, more tightly around her, pulling her close against his chest. He kissed her hair, the corner of her eye where the tear had been, the line of her jaw. Each touch was slow, deliberate, a question asked and answered. Each movement was a reverence, a healing. She met his gestures, her hand moving from his shirt to his face, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw, learning his geography in the dark. A small, trembling smile touched her lips. Even as her breathing came short and fast, they stayed like that, wrapped together in his coat, a single island of warmth, listening to the rain hammer on the tin roof. The world was reduced to this. A sudden sound broke the spell, the scrape of a heavy boot on gravel, just outside the stall, the clink of a rifle butt settling on the ground. The guard, they froze. Their eyes met in the dark. The shared danger, the shared purpose, rushed back in. They did not pull apart, not entirely, but the passion subsided, replaced by something just as strong, a quiet, defiant alliance. A slow smile touched Abram's lips. Anza mirrored it. The love that had just sparked between them was not a wildfire. It was a hearth fire, banked low against the embers, hidden from the wind, but strong enough, warm enough, to last through the long, cold night. and be ready for the fight that would come with the dawn. Abram settled back against a bale of hay, pulling her with him so they sat side by side, his arms still heavy and warm around her. "They think they have us," he whispered, his lips close to her ear. Anza leaned her head on his shoulder, her hand still holding his. The fear was gone. "Tomorrow," she whispered back, her voice clear and strong. "Tomorrow we find the truth. Together." The sky was a sheet of cold, gray iron. The rain had passed, leaving the air sharp and smelling of wet dust and a faint, acrid tang that was not wood smoke. Abram and Anza were huddled by the stall gate, listening to the muffled sounds of the occupation. The heavy tread of the night watchman stopped. They heard a low grunt, the scrape of a stool, and then the arrival of new boots. A sound cut the pre-dawn quiet, a low, two-note whistle, imitating the call of a canyon wren. Abram tensed. He knew that call. He moved to the slats. Maeve Holliday was walking across the livery yard, her heavy form moving with a purpose that belied the hour. She carried a steaming coffee pot in one hand. In the other, held low against her skirt, was a heavy, black cast-iron skillet. The new guard, a thick-necked regulator, turned as she approached, his rifle held loosely. "What do you want, old woman?" "Judge Pike's orders," Maeve said, her voice a low, comforting rumble. "Hot coffee for the watch. Keep the chill off." The guard relaxed, his greed overcoming his caution. "About time. Give it here." He reached for the pot. He never saw the skillet. Maeve swung it, all her weight behind it, in a flat, brutal arc. The sound was not a loud clang, but a dense, sickening thud, like an axe hitting wet wood. The man's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed, a sack of boneless meat, his rifle clattering on the stones. "Wasted good coffee," Maeve muttered. She snatched the ring of keys from the man's belt and tossed the pot aside. A moment later, the heavy padlock clicked open, and the chain fell free. "Out!" she hissed, pulling the stall gate wide. "Not the street. Through the back stables. Go, and God help you both." They slipped out into the alleyway, the cold air hitting them like a slap. They ran low and fast, past the dark rear of the hotel, heading for the low hills that offered cover. As they cleared the last building, Abram stopped dead. He was looking northwest, toward his own valley. A thick, greasy column of black smoke was rising into the gray sky, staining the new day. It was coming from the exact location of his ranch. "Abram," Anza whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "He's burned it," Abram said. His voice was not angry. It was terrifyingly calm, hollowed out. "Dragert, he's burned the ranch. To drive you out," Anza said. "No," Abram said, his eyes fixed on the smoke. "To frame them. The truce signal. My ranch burning. Pike will tell the town the Red Bluff attacked a white settler. He's starting his war. He's justifying a massacre." The betrayal was absolute. A final, poisoned knife. Abram Whitlock. A horse slid to a halt in the mouth of the alley, lathered and heaving. Wren Talbot threw herself from the saddle, her face pale and streaked with mud. She had been riding all night. "They're moving something," she gasped, shoving a sheaf of folded papers into Abram's hand. "I knew it was wrong. I went back to the Silver Butte depot. I told the night clerk I was picking up Judge Pike's private mail." Abram unfolded the papers. They were shipping manifests. A priority freight consignment from the territorial capital for 4 crates, marked excavation equipment, total weight 900 pounds. "Dynamite," Abram said, the word tasting like ash. "Look at the signature," Anza said, her finger jabbing the bottom line of the receipt. She recognized the elegant, looped script, signed for and delivery taken by Reverend Ephraim Sutter for church restoration and charitable works. Abram looked from the column of smoke that had been his home to the signature on the explosives manifest. "Sutter. He's the fuse. We need Jonah," Abram said. "We need weapons." The smithy was dark, the great doors barred from the inside. "Jonah," Abram hammered on the thick wood. "It's Abram, open up." They heard a heavy iron bar being lifted, and the door scraped open a few inches. Jonah Creed's eye appeared in the crack. He saw them and pulled the door open, hauling them inside, then slamming and barring it behind them. The forge was cold. "They were here," Jonah said, his voice a low bass rumble. "Half an hour ago. 4 of them, looking for you. They know I opened the box. They've burned my ranch. Jonah, they're planning to blame the Red Bluff, and Sutter has a cache of dynamite." "He does," Jonah said grimly. He looked past Abram, his eyes suddenly wide, focused on the back window. And they came back. A heavy boot kicked the front door. "Open up. Smith Judge's orders. The cellar." Jonah roared, grabbing a heavy trap door in the floor and ripping it open. "Get in now." "I'm not leaving you," Abram yelled. "You are not fighting them." Jonah grabbed a weapon from his workbench and shoved it into Abram's chest. It was not a rifle. It was a monstrous thing, a heavy, short-barreled musket with a flared muzzle, its stock cut down to a pistol grip, its mechanism gleaming and newly oiled. "My own make." Jonah grunted. "A scorpion sting, loaded with scrap iron and black powder. It will clear a room. Now go." The front door splintered, bursting open. 3 regulators spilled in, rifles up. Jonah did not wait. He roared, a sound of pure rage, and charged them. Not with a gun, but with a 2-foot steel bar, glowing cherry red from the forge he had secretly been tending. "Abram, no!" Anza screamed, as Abram raised the musket. But Jonah was already on them. Abram grabbed Anza and pulled her down into the earthen cellar, hauling the heavy trapdoor shut just as the room above exploded. They heard the deafening boom of a rifle, the sound of a man screaming in agony as the hot steel found him, a second shot, and then a heavy, final crash. Abram threw the trapdoor open. The forge was filled with smoke. 2 regulators were on the ground, one writhing, clutching a terribly burned face. The third was gone. Jonah Creed was slumped against his anvil, a dark stain spreading across his leather apron, his breath coming in shallow, wet gasps. He got me, Abram," Jonah whispered, as Abram and Anza rushed to his side. "Stay with me, Jonah." Abram tore open the shirt. The bullet had gone high, through the shoulder, but it was bleeding badly. Abram grabbed a clean rag and pressed it hard against the wound. "Get him to the cellar," Anza said, her voice shaking but firm. They half-carried, half-dragged the big man into the darkness below and barred the door. "They'll be back," Abram said, his voice raw. "They'll burn the forge with us in it." "Then we have to move," Anza whispered, her hands covered in Jonah's blood. "We go to the church," Abram said, his voice flat and cold. "The ridgetop bell tower. That's where Sutter will have the dynamite. That is the head of the snake." "Abram, the church." "I cannot," she whispered, the terror of that night returning. "You will not have to." The voice came from the top of the cellar steps. They looked up. The trapdoor was gone. Cade Rusk stood there, silhouetted against the light of the forge, his long rifle held casually, its muzzle aimed not at Abram, but at Anza. "She is the one the judge wants," Rusk said, his voice light, almost conversational. "She is the loose string. The judge hates loose strings. Drop the big gun, rancher." Abram did not move. The massive scorpion sting held steady. "I will shoot her in the knee," Rusk said, his aim shifting slightly. "It is a messy thing. Then I will shoot the smith again. Then I will shoot you. Drop it." Slowly, his knuckles white, Abram placed the heavy musket on the dirt floor. "Good man." Rusk descended the steps. He grabbed Anza by the arm, yanking her to her feet and pulling her in front of him. A human shield. Her head was high, her eyes blazing with hatred. "The judge sends his regards," Rusk said to Abram. "He says do not follow. He says your land is forfeit." He began to back up the steps, dragging Anza with him. She did not scream. She fought, twisting, kicking, her nails raking for his eyes. As Rusk hauled her through the opening, her hand snagged on the splintered wood of the doorframe. Then they were gone. Abram scrambled up the steps. The forge was empty. The street outside was empty. He stopped at the doorway. He knelt, snagged on a sharp nail. Fluttering in the draft was a small scrap of gray wool, torn from the cloak Maeve had given her. He knew. Rusk was not taking her to the jail. He was not taking her to Pike. He was taking her to the explosives. He was taking her to the man who signed the manifest. He was taking her to Sutter, at the ridgetop bell tower. Abram was alone. His ranch was ash. His friends were wounded. The woman was gone. He was a man possessed. He grabbed the scorpion's sting, checked its load, and ran. He ran not to the livery, but to the Badlands, toward Mission Wash, where he had last seen Palin Ridge. He found them there, watching the smoke from his ranch. Not just the Red Bluff warriors, but half a dozen other ranchers, men who had stayed neutral, their faces now grim and hard. The burning of the Whitlock ranch had been the last straw. "They burned you out, Whitlock." One of the ranchers, a man named Harris, said. "They have Anza," Abram said, his voice a rasp. Interrupting him, "They have her at the bell tower, with Sutter, and 4 crates of dynamite. They are going to blow the bluff, and they are going to blame your people," he said, locking eyes with Palin Ridge. A low growl of rage went through the assembled men. "Pike has gone too far," Harris said. "We will not be run out by a crooked judge." "We are with you, Whitlock," another said. "But the church is high ground. They will see us coming a mile off." "We do not go up the front," Abram said, his voice taking on the cold steel of command. "This is not a war. It is an execution. We are taking the head, Draggart, Pike, and Sutter. No one else. I want no civilian bloodshed." He looked at Palin Ridge. "Can you stop them from running block the pass at Badger Switchback?" Palin Ridge nodded. "They will not pass. Harris, your men and I. We go up the back trail. We go quiet. We go now." Badger Switchback was a narrow, treacherous goat trail that wound up the sheer back face of the bluff. Abram led the way, the heavy musket strapped to his back. They found the rear guard halfway up. Cade Rusk was a professional. A single rifle shot cracked the air, kicking rock chips into Abram's face. 3 regulators were dug in behind a nest of boulders above them. "We are pinned," Harris yelled, ducking as another shot whined past his ear. "No, we are not." Abram uncoiled his lariat. He was not aiming for a man. He was aiming for the unstable overhang of scree and loose rock just above the regulator's position. He spun the rope, a wide, fast loop, and threw it with all his strength. The loop settled over a jutting pinnacle. Abram and Harris pulled, hard. The rock slide was not an avalanche, but it was enough. Boulders and gravel poured down the slope, sweeping over the regulator's nest. 2 of them scrambled away, disappearing up the trail. The third, a young man, barely 20, slipped and fell, tumbling down the scree, his rifle spinning away. He landed hard at Abram's feet, his leg bent at a sickening, unnatural angle. The young regulator looked up, his face white with terror, expecting the knife. Abram grabbed the front of his shirt, hauling him up. "Where is she?" "The tower, the bell tower," the kid screamed, sobbing. "Rusk took her up. He's with Sutter." "How many?" "Just them, just Rusk and the preacher, I swear." "Who killed the Red Bluff hunters?" Abram demanded, his voice a low growl. "The 2 at the burned wagon." The kid's eyes were wild with fear. It was Sutter. We were just supposed to scare them off, but the preacher, he had a wire, a thin wire. He used it. He said it was God's judgment. He said it would start the cleansing. He is insane. He's going to kill them all." Abram let him go, shoving him toward Harris. "Get him tied up. Get him to Hiram Bell when this is done. He is our witness." Abram looked up toward the top of the bluff. The stone bell tower was just visible through the pines. The rage in him was a cold, pure thing. This was not a blood feud. This was justice. "No blood feud," he said, echoing Palin Ridge. "Only justice for those who exploit the hate." He chambered a round in his own rifle and began the final climb. The cold cellar of the smithy was a tomb of shadows. smelling of damp earth, old coal, and Jonah's blood. The trapdoor was shut, barred from within, a flimsy defense against the forces that now owned the town. Abram knelt by Jonah, who was propped against a crumbling stone foundation, his breathing shallow, his face a mask of gray, sweat-sheen pain. "He is right," Maeve Holliday said, her voice a low, hard, flat line. She had found them there, a ghost of righteous fury. "Pike's festival is a trap. He means to have the whole town in the square as witnesses to his justice." "No," Abram said, his voice raw. He was cleaning the scorpion sting musket, his hands moving with a mechanical, obsessive calm. "Not witnesses, hostages. Then we change the play," Maeve said. "He wants a festival, we will give him one. The women of this town. We've been baking for the Reclamation Day social for a week. We will hold our own social." Her eyes glinted in the lantern light. "A charity pie sale, at the livery, for the poor burned-out soul at Whitlock Gulch. We'll pull the crowd west, away from the square, before Pike can set his men." "You would be turning them from hostages," Abram said, looking up, "into an audience, safe, but able to see." "They will see what Pike does," Maeve nodded, "and they will see what we do." Abram looked at Harris, the rancher who had followed him from the bluff. "Harris, can you get your men to stand with Palin Ridge?" "They will," Harris said, his jaw tight. "The burning of your ranch, it was a message to all of us. We know who did it." "Good. Palin Ridge is at Devil's Cut. It is the only road Dragert can use to get his wagons or heavy equipment out. Palin will seal it. Dragert will be in a box. That leaves the tower," Harris said, looking at Abram. "Rusk and Sutter. And the dynamite. And Anza," Abram added, his voice dropping. "The tower is mine. I go up the back way, alone." "You go up," Jonah Creed's voice rasped from the shadows. "And he blows the tower with you in it. Sutter, he's not just a thief. Abram, he's a zealot. He told the boy he's cleansing the valley." Jonah pushed himself up, gritting his teeth against the bolt of fire from his shoulder. He pointed to a piece of paper on the floor, on which he had been sketching with a piece of charcoal. "The bell," Jonah said, his voice strained. "The dynamite. It will be wired to the bell. He'll ring it. A proclamation. The hammer will strike a percussion cap. The whole belfry will go. You cannot stop the fuse in time." "So what do I do?" "Jonah, you do not stop the fuse." Jonah said, "You stop the hammer." He tapped the drawing. It was a complex, beautiful sketch of the bell's trigger mechanism. "It's on a pivot, a heavy iron yoke. If you can jam the pivot before he pulls the rope, the hammer will never strike. The bell will not ring. The cap will not fire." He reached beside him and held up a piece of heavy, forged iron. It was a complex wedge, shaped with grooves and a sharp, hardened point. He had been filing it, slowly, painfully, in the dark. "I made this," Jonah whispered, his strength failing. "From the broken axle of the judge's own carriage. It fits. You get this behind the yoke, you jam it hard, you silence the bell, you silence the bomb." Abram took the heavy piece of steel. It was still warm. "I understand. This leaves the proof." Anza's voice said, "They all turned." She was not there, but her presence filled the room. Abram spoke as if she was, "We cannot keep it all in one place. If I fall, the truth dies." He began to divide the spoils of their investigation. "Maeve," he said, handing her the heavy brass hydrometer. "You know every rancher's wife in this valley. You show them this. You show them that Dragert was not just stealing water. He was measuring it, like a commodity. They will understand." "Wren," he said to the young courier, who was tending to Jonah, "you are the fastest. You take the most valuable thing." He handed her the ministry fund ledger. "You keep it hidden. If you see this plan fail, if you see me fall, you ride. You do not stop. You ride to the territorial marshal in Silver Butte, and you give him that book." "And the map?" Wren asked. "The aqueduct map. The map stays in town." Abram said, "It stays with someone they cannot touch. Someone with a clean collar. Pastor Linwood Hale. Harris supplied. The young preacher. Sutter hates him because the town respects him. He is honest. Get it to him. Harris, Abram commanded. Tell him to wait. He will know when the moment is right. The plan was set. A complex, delicate machine of 3 moving parts. Palin Ridge and the ranchers sealing the valley. Maeve and the women drawing the townspeople to safety. Abram climbing the tower. There is one more piece, Wren said. Her eyes bright and sharp. The telegraph. Pike will not call for fake troops in his own name. He'll send a wire to the capital, claiming an insurrection. He'll get real troops, and he'll have the law on his side. He will, Abram agreed. Can you stop it? The line runs through the South Pass. I can cut it, she said. I will be back before dark. She was out of the cellar and on her horse before anyone could argue. The hours bled away. The light filtering through the cellar grate turned from gray to a deep, bruised orange. Night was coming. Maeve and Harris left, melting into the shadows of the occupied town. Their tasks clear. Abram stayed with Jonah, waiting. He checked his rifle. He checked the scorpion's sting. He slotted the heavy disengagement wedge into his belt. From the high bluffs, far away, came the long, mournful cry of a lobo wolf. The sound of the high, empty dark. A beat later, the trapdoor scraped open. Wren Talbot fell into the cellar, her clothes torn, her face white with a new, colder terror. She was holding a long, yellow flimsy of paper. I did not just cut the line, she panted, her voice shaking. I tapped it. I listened. I heard what he was sending. She held up the telegram. He is not calling the capital, Abram. He is not calling the army. He sent this to a private line in Silver Butte, to a Captain Garrison. Abram knew the name. Garrison was a mercenary, a man who had pacified mining strikes in Colorado, a man known for leaving no witnesses. He's not calling for troops, Wren whispered, her voice breaking. He's calling for butchers. He is hiring a massacre. She read from the paper, her voice trembling. Insurrection at Juniper Ford. Red Bluff and renegade ranchers have taken the town. My authority compromised. Execute standing order. Cleanse the riot. Await my signal. The bell will toll. Abram's blood went cold. The bell. Sutter was not just rigging the tower to kill Anza or to stop him. It is the signal, Abram said, his voice a dead, hollow thing. The explosion, it is not the end of the plan. It is the start of it. Pike will blow the tower. He will blame it on the Red Bluff. And Garrison's men, waiting in the hills, will ride in and restore order. They will wipe out everyone. The Red Bluff, the ranchers, the whole town. Anyone who saw the proof. He looked at Jonah. He looked at Wren. The stakes had just risen from a valley's water to its very soul. We have to stop that bell, Wren said. Abram nodded. He picked up his hat from the dirt floor. He had retrieved it from the smithy after Rusk had taken Anza. He tore a blank strip from the edge of Pike's telegram. With a piece of charcoal, he wrote, his blunt fingers awkward, 4 words. Get the water for them. He folded the small scrap and tucked it deep into the leather headband of the hat. He placed the hat on his head, pulling the brim low. He climbed the cellar steps. Night had fallen. The moon was a sliver, giving no light. From Bluff Ridge, across the valley, a spark ignited. A fire. A blanket was thrown. 3 columns of smoke rose, black against the stars. A pause. 2 columns. A pause. 1. The parley call. The last plea for peace. A public declaration, seen by the entire town, that they were here to talk. Abram looked across the dark expanse to the opposite bluff. There, the ridgetop bell tower stood. A spike of black stone aimed at the sky. Its shadow, cast by the torches of the regulators, fell long and sharp across the town. It was no longer a symbol of faith. It was a guillotine, waiting to fall. The time had come. The ridgetop bell tower was a cold stone throat, open to the night sky. The great iron bell hung silent above the trapdoor, a black void. Below it, lashed to the 4 heavy crates of excavation supplies. Anza Calder watched the man who had closed a church door on her. Reverend Ephraim Sutter was not praying. He was arranging his tools, a percussion cap, a long coil of miner's fuse. He worked with the loving precision of a man setting a communion table. "It is a fallen world, my child," Sutter said, his voice mild, almost kind. He looked at her, his eyes glistening with a fanatic's moisture. "Judge Pike sees order. Mr. Dragert sees prophet. They are simple men. I see the hand of God. This valley is sick. It is full of compromise. The savage, the faithless rancher, the arrogant. You are a murderer." Anza spat, her voice tight from the ropes. "I am a purifier," Sutter corrected, snipping the fuse. "When this bell tolls, it will be a baptism, a fire to cleanse the rot, and from the ashes, under Judge Pike's steady hand, we will build a new, orderly world, a righteous world. You and Mr. Whitlock, you are just the last of the rot." Down in the square, the town was a powder keg. Maeve's pie social had worked. The crowd was gathered near the livery, a mass of nervous shadows lit by the torches of the regulators. Luther Dragert and his men formed a hard line, rifles held ready, cutting the square in half. Into that empty space walked Chief Palin Ridge. He was flanked by 2 warriors, but he himself was unarmed. He stopped 20 yards from Dragert. The 3-2-1 smoke signal was still rising from the bluff behind him, a public declaration. "This is our town, Dragert," Palin Ridge said, his voice carrying in the cold. "Our water. You have no right here. Step away from the water. Let the people go." "I take my orders from the law," Dragert sneered. "Then here is the law," Judge Pike's voice boomed. He stepped onto the hotel veranda. Flanked by 4 regulators, he held a paper high. "As the appointed judiciary of Sawtooth County, I declare this gathering an insurrection. I declare martial law disperse or be fired upon." Abram was not listening. He was climbing. The back of the bluff was sheer rock. The old mission stairs cut into the stone, leading to a rotten wooden ladder that scaled the last 30 feet to the belfry trap door. He moved like a shadow. The scorpion sting musket strapped to his back. In his teeth, he held his Bowie knife. His hands, raw and bleeding, gripped the damp, splitting wood. He reached the platform just below the trap door. "I told you not to follow, rancher." Cade Rusk stepped from the shadows of the stairway, his rifle leveled. He had been waiting. "She is not worth this," Rusk said, almost pityingly. "It is just land. It is just water." Abram stopped, 10 feet below him, his arms aching, his position impossible. He took the knife from his mouth. "He is paying you," Abram said, breathing hard. "To shoot unarmed men. To help a fanatic blow up a town. Is that what you are?" "I am a man who gets paid," Rusk said, shrugging, lining up his shot. "That kid you left on the trail," Abram said, his voice low. "The one with the broken leg. He will live. He told us. He said Sutter was the one with the wire. He told us everything." Rusk paused. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "You are better than this." "Rusk," Abram said, "you are just choosing the wrong side. You are choosing to be the man they hang when the real marshal arrives. There is no real marshal coming." Rusk sneered. "Then choose," Abram said. "Choose who you want to be when this night is over." Rusk hesitated, his rifle dipping a fraction of an inch. It was all Abram needed. He did not climb. He leapt upward, grabbing the muzzle of Rusk's rifle and yanking it down. The gun fired, the explosion deafening, the bullet burying itself in the ladder. Abram used the momentum, swinging his legs up, kicking Rusk square in the chest. Rusk flew backward, hitting the stone wall, the rifle clattering away. Abram was on him, the knife at his throat. Rusk was fast, but Abram was driven by a force Rusk could not understand. "He's lighting it!" Anza screamed from above. Abram looked at Rusk. The man's eyes were wide, beaten. Abram did not cut. He reversed the knife, slamming the heavy pommel into Rusk's temple. Rusk went limp, unconscious, but alive. Abram left him, scrambling for the trapdoor. "Martial law," Pike shouted again. On what authority? On the authority of this, Maeve Holliday's voice, high and clear, cut through the din. She stepped forward, holding the heavy brass hydrometer. The authority of a thief, measuring the water he means to steal. Slander, Pike roared. And this, Pastor Linwood Hale, the young, honest preacher, stepped up beside her, his face pale but resolved. He held up the engineer's map, the authority of a liar mapping the aqueduct to his dry mine. And this, Maeve bellowed, unrolling a long scroll of butcher paper where she had copied the ledger. The ministry fund ledger read, Pastor read it for the town. Hale began to read, his voice ringing. October 3rd, $5,000 from Yellow Rock Claim. October 5th, $200 to Cade Rusk. October 7th, $900 for excavation equipment. Signed by... He paused, his voice breaking. Signed by Reverend Ephraim Sutter. Blasphemy! Sutter shrieked from the tower. He had heard. He looked down, his face a mask of insane rage. They will not stop the word of God. He struck a match. The fuse, leading to the percussion cap on the crates, hissed to life. A small, spitting orange snake. Abram! Anza screamed. Abram burst through the trap door. He saw it all in one glance. Anza tied to the crates, Sutter standing by the bell rope, his hand reaching for it, ready to send the signal to Garrison and blow the tower. The fuse burning. 3, maybe 4 seconds long. He had no time. He could not reach the fuse. He could not reach Sutter. He remembered Jonah. Stop the hammer. He drew the heavy forged wedge from his belt. As Sutter grabbed the rope to toll the bell, Abram lunged. Not at Sutter, but at the bell's mechanism. He threw himself at the massive iron yoke, the pivot point for the hammer. Sutter pulled. The bell swung, the iron hammer moved. Abram shoved the wedge, Jonah's wedge, into the mechanism. The sound was not a toll. It was a dying scream of metal. The yoke jammed, the hammer snapped, and the entire bell, a ton of cast iron, ripped free from its ancient housing. It fell. It crashed through the belfry floor, severing the burning fuse with an inch to spare. It plunged through the tower, shattering the rotten stairs, and buried itself in the earth at the church's foundation. It did not ring. It only emitted one single, cracked, final thud that shook the entire bluff. The signal had failed. Silence. The tower was filled with dust and splintered wood. The fuse was dead. Anza was sobbing, straining against the ropes. Abram cut her free with his knife. She did not fall. She launched herself into his arms, her hands grabbing his face, pulling him down. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a desperate, violent claiming of life. It was fast, full of breath and gratitude and the taste of soot. It was over in a second, a jolt of pure energy. You came, she breathed. I told you, he said. Sutter stared at the hole where the bell had been, his face blank with failure. Anza grabbed the scorpion sting musket from Abram's back. Abram picked up Rusk's fallen rifle. They turned, together, side by side, and faced the door. In the square, the crowd was stunned by the sound, staring at the silenced tower. It failed, Wren Talbot's voice shrieked. She rode her horse into the center of the square, throwing not a book, but a single yellow paper. The telegram. He is a traitor. He was not calling the army, he was calling mercenaries, he was calling for a massacre. Pastor Hale snatched the paper. He read it aloud. Cleanse the riot. Await my signal. The bell will toll. The crowd turned. The ranchers, the miners, the women. Their fear was gone, replaced by a cold, unified rage. Traitor. The tide broke. 2 of the regulators in the front line looked at each other, then at Dragert. They lowered their rifles and raised their hands. We ain't part of this, one said. Not a massacre. Luther Dragert saw his power evaporate. He lost his mind. He drew his pistol and fired, not at Abram, but at the man who had defied him, at Palin Ridge. The shot echoed. Palin Ridge grunted, staggering back, clutching his shoulder. Abram was already there, at the edge of the bluff, looking down. He had seen the move. He raised Rusk's rifle. He did not aim for the heart. He aimed for the threat. He fired. The shot was perfect. The rifle in Dregert's hand exploded, the wood and metal splintering, shattering his grip, leaving him disarmed and staring at his bloody hand. In the tower, Sutter saw it all. He lunged for the trap door to escape. Anza leveled the scorpion's sting. She did not shoot. She used the heavy, forged bell wedge, the one Abram had dropped. As Sutter ran past, she swung it like a club. A low, hard strike to his knees. He howled and collapsed. Judge Silas Pike saw the end. He saw his muscle disarmed, his prophet fallen, his army of mercenaries unsignaled. He turned, his face a mask of white panic, and ran. He ran for his horse, for the alley, for any escape. He did not get 10 feet. The crowd, which had been a herd of sheep, was now a pack of wolves. They did not shout. They just moved. Harris, Maeve, Pastor Hale, the neutral miners, the ranchers he had tried to bankrupt, and the silent, imposing figures of the Red Bluff warriors who had slipped down from the pass. They formed a circle, a tight, silent, inescapable ring of his own people. The judge stopped. There was nowhere left to run. The aftermath was a vacuum. The town square, which moments before had been a stage for betrayal and violence, was now utterly silent, save for the weeping of Reverend Sutter. Judge Pike, his face a mask of waxy, reptilian fury, was bound back to back with the sniveling preacher, their wrists tied with Jonah's thickest rope. Luther Dregert sat on the ground, disarmed, his right hand wrapped in a bloody kerchief, staring at the ruins of his rifle. He was surrounded, not by armed men, but by the quiet, unmoving figures of the ranchers he had tried to break. Wren Talbot had already been dispatched, riding hard for Silver Butte. "Tell the territorial marshal," Abram had instructed her. "We have 2 criminals and 1 witness waiting for him." Now, Abram walked to Dregert. He stood over the mining boss, his shadow falling long in the torchlight. "It is over, Dregert," Abram said. Dregert looked up, his eyes calculating, the panic already fading, replaced by the cold arithmetic of a man who buys his way out of everything. "What is the price?" "Whitlock." Dregert grunted. "Your ranch, I will rebuild it. Double. You want gold. Name the figure. I will pay it." Abram looked at Maeve, at Pastor Hale, at Palin Ridge, whose arm was being bound by Dr. Hiram Bell. He looked at Anza, who stood beside him, her face set. "You have nothing we want to buy," Abram said. "Your money is poison. You cannot just leave me to them." Dregert stammered, his gaze flickering to the silent Red Bluff warriors. "They will kill me. We are not murderers," Palin Ridge said, his voice low and pained. "You are not worth the blood." "Then what?" Dregert yelled. Anza stepped forward. She was holding the original water charter, the one she had carried from the church. "This," she said, her voice clear and carrying. "This is what we want." "The water," Dregert almost laughed. "You did all this for the water. You will sign a full, legal relinquishment," Abram said, "of all claims on the Yellow Rock mine, on the aqueduct, and on any water rights associated with Coyote Spring. You will sign them over, not to me, but to the town, to the community of Juniper Ford. And if I do not," Abram nodded toward the approaching dawn, "the marshal will be here by noon. We will give him Pike and Sutter, and we will give him you and the testimony of 20 ranchers and the Red Bluff, and that telegram. You will hang, not for the water, for the conspiracy, for the murder of those hunters, for calling in Garrison's butchers." Dregert's face went pale. He knew he was beaten. "Get me a pen," he hissed, "and a witness." Pastor Linwood Hale stepped forward, holding a bottle of ink and a new quill. By the light of a lantern, on the back of his own forged mining map, Luther Dregert signed his empire away. He traded a valley's future for his own broken life. The next day, the church of St. Augustine was full. The great iron bell was gone, leaving a splintered hole in the belfry floor, open to the sky. The wound, Pastor Hale called it. He did not preach from the pulpit. He stood on the floor, among the people. "This house," he said, his voice resonating with a quiet, new authority, "was used as a fortress for a lie. It was locked against those who needed it. Today, that stops. Today, it becomes a house of truth." He walked to the wall where Sutter's self-important portrait had hung. He took it down, in its place. He mounted a simple glass-fronted frame, and inside it, he placed the original water charter of Coyote Spring. "It will hang here," he declared, not as a relic, but as a reminder. A covenant. The law and the water belong to all. This house is now its keeper, and you are all its witnesses. The true baptism, however, did not happen in the church. It happened at the spring. It was not a ceremony, but a gathering. The ranchers, Maeve, Harris, Jonah, his arm in a thick sling, and from the North Ridge, Palin Ridge and his people. They met at the head of the main irrigation ditch, the one that Draggart Stakes had claimed. Abram and Palin Ridge stood at the head gate. Abram dipped a canteen into the clear, cold water of the spring. Palin Ridge held a cured water skin, filled from the well on the Red Bluff lands. They did not speak. They looked at each other. Then, as one, they poured the two streams of water into the dry, earthen ditch. The water mixed, swirling, a symbol of a shared life, and began its run down the channel, splitting to feed the ranches in the gulch and the small cornfields on the tribal lands. For a long moment, the only sound was the rush of new water. Then, a child from the town, who had been watching, laughed. He ran to the ditch, followed by two Red Bluff children. They stomped in the mud, splashing, their shouts breaking the solemnity. The adults watched, and one by one, the hard lines of worry and suspicion faded. A rancher offered Palin Ridge a plug of tobacco. Maeve Holliday produced a basket of apple tarts and began handing them out. The valley had begun to heal. That evening, the porch of Maeve's small house was a haven. The smithy was too full of blood, and Abram's ranch house was a chimney of smoking ash. Dr. Hiram Bell, smelling strongly of his celebratory whiskey, finished the last stitch in Abram's forehead, a shallow cut from the belfry fight. "You are a fool, Whitlock," Hiram muttered, tying it off. "But you are a lucky fool. This one will scar. He has got a few of those," Anza said quietly. She was sitting on the porch steps, watching the sky turn a deep, peaceful bruised purple. Hiram Bell packed his bag, nodded to Palin Ridge, who was resting inside, and left them. The quiet settled around them, comfortable and deep. Abram sat on the step next to Anza, close enough that their shoulders brushed. He looked at his hands, which were scraped raw and blistered from the climb. "The house is gone," Anza said, her voice soft. "He burned it all. He burned wood." Abram replied, his voice a low rumble. "The land is still there, the water is there, the foundation is still good." He flexed his painful fingers. "Wood can be replaced." He looked at her, his gaze steady in the twilight. "A house is not a home, Anza, it is just a box to keep the wind out." She met his gaze, understanding the question he was not asking. "Then we had better build a strong one," she whispered. He did not smile, but a warmth lit his eyes. He reached out, his rough, scarred hand covering hers where it rested on the step. He agreed. Later, inside, the small parlor was warm from the hearth. Maeve had fed them a thick stew, and now the sounds of the town not of panic, but of rebuilding were a distant murmur. Jonah was asleep in a chair, his breathing deep and steady. Abram stood by the mantel, just watching the fire. Anza came to stand beside him. The air between them was charged, not with the frantic energy of the fight, but with the slow, deep pull of what came after. He turned to her. He did not speak. He just held out his hand. She placed her hand in his. He drew her, gently, into the small, clear space on the rag rug. He put his free hand on the small of her back, a gesture that was both respectful and possessive. She rested her hand on his shoulder. the rough wool of his shirt solid beneath her palm. There was no music, only the crackle of the fire and the beat of their own hearts. They began to move, a slow, shuffling circle that was not quite a dance. It was a holding, a swaying. He pulled her closer, his hand splayed wide on her back, molding her to him. She did not resist. She let out a breath she felt she had been holding since the church steps, and leaned her head against his chest. She closed her eyes, listening to the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heart. It was the sound of safety. It was the sound of home. Abram rested his chin on the top of her hair. Inhaling the faint scent of wood smoke, he stopped moving, just holding her. "Anza," he murmured, his voice thick. She looked up. His face, lit by the fire, was all hard lines and shadow, but his eyes were open, unguarded, and full of a profound, gentle hunger. He lowered his head. This kiss was not the desperate, breathless act in the tower. This was a promise. It was slow and deep and sure. It was a mapping of a new territory, a long, unhurried exploration. Her hand slid from his shoulder to his neck, her fingers lacing into the thick hair at his nape, pulling him impossibly closer. His arm tightened, lifting her against him, until there was no space left between them at all. When they finally broke for air, he did not let her go. He rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling. "The desire," he whispered, his voice rough. It is a lot, Anza." "I know," she breathed, her own voice trembling. "It is for me, too." He looked into her eyes. "This," he said, his gaze sweeping over her face. "This is not just for a night. I am too old, and I've been too empty, for just a night." "I am not looking for just a night," she replied, her hand tracing the line of his jaw. "I am looking for all of them, starting now." Maeve entered, carrying 2 steaming mugs. She stopped, taking in the scene. The couple by the fire, their foreheads touching, their hands linked. She smiled, a deep, satisfied smile. "Well," she said, breaking the spell, "it is about time." Abram's hat, the one he had placed on the grain shed crate, sat on the table. Maeve set the mugs down. "You need to be careful with that thing, Mr. Whitlock. A man ought to put his heart right where he puts his hat. Best not to be careless with either." Abram looked at the hat, then at Anza. A slow smile, the first real smile Anza had ever seen on him, transformed his face. He picked it up. He did not put it on his own head. He placed it gently on hers. It was far too large, sliding down, covering her eyes. She laughed, a sudden, bright, beautiful sound, and pushed it back on her head. "Maeve is right," Abram said, his voice soft. He touched the brim. "From now on, this hat, it keeps the wind off too." A shadow fell in the open doorway. Palin Ridge stood there, his arm in its new sling. He nodded to Abram. He walked to Anza. He held out his good hand. In his palm was a simple, beautiful necklace made of polished, dark red cedar beads. "The water flows for all," he said. He looked at her, his eyes holding a new, deep respect. "You spoke truth when others used bullets. You healed a feud that has bled this valley for a generation. You are not just a settler. You are Olawaha." He placed the necklace over her head, the smooth wood warm against her skin. "It means water keeper," he said. "You are the bridge. You are welcome in our lands. Always." The next morning, as the sun rose, Wren Talbot was standing on a ladder outside the scarred church. She was nailing a new, freshly painted sign over the door, covering the space where the old one had been. It did not say St. Augustine. It said, in clean, black letters, "Water and righteousness belong to all." 1 year passed. The snows came deep and heavy, burying the scars of the valley under a clean, white silence. When the thaw arrived, it was not a flood, but a gentle release. The water from Coyote Spring, now belonging to everyone, ran clear and true in the new irrigation ditches. The land, which had been alkali gray and brittle, responded. By midsummer, The valley floor was a quilt of impossible green. The Whitlock Gulch, rebuilt, was no longer a monument to solitude. The new ranch house was solid, built of fresh pine and stone, with a porch that wrapped around 3 sides, and its fences were strong. In Juniper Ford, the change was palpable. The town was no longer afraid. The market day was loud, a chaotic mix of ranchers, red bluff traders, and miners from new, honest claims. Men still wore irons, but the habit of checking them at the town limits had taken hold. A man's reputation was once again worth more than the speed of his draw. And just north of the town, in the shadow of the bluff, stood a small, one-room building with clean glass windows, the Coyote Spring School. Inside, the children of the town and the children of the Red Bluff sat side by side, learning their letters from a single slate, their laughter mixing, their futures intertwined. Abram and Anza rode the ditch line, their horses walking slow. The air was warm, smelling of curing hay and wild sage. They reached the base of the bluff as the sun struck noon. From the ridgetop tower, a sound rolled across the valley. It was not the cracked, dead thud of the old bell. This was a new voice, a deep, resonant bronze peal that vibrated in the chest. It was not a sound of judgment. It was a reminder. It rang to mark the hour, to warn of distant thunder, to call men to speak. It was no longer a tool of fear. Jonah Creed, his smithy busier than it had ever been, had forged the new bell himself. It had been his masterpiece, a winter's work. Before it was hoisted into the repaired belfry, he had taken his finest chisel along the heavy bronze lip, where only the ringer could see it. He had carved the new law of the valley 321, come to speak. The memory of the valley was kept, not just in the bell, but in the town's new heart. Maeve Holliday had taken over the abandoned saloon, whitewashed the walls, and opened the Hearth Hat, a kitchen that served coffee and stew to all, regardless of the color of their skin. And there, hanging on the wall above the main fireplace, was Abram's first hat, the battered gray felt Stetson. Stained by weather and time, Maeve kept it there. She said, to remind folk what decency looked like, to remind them that it all started on a night of killing snow, when a man had chosen mercy over comfort. The law, too, had found its proper place. Every year, on the first day of the high summer, when the streams began to shallow, Pastor Linwood Hale would unlock the glass frame in the church. He would carry the original water charter into the sun-filled square. He would read it, his voice clear, reminding every citizen of the covenant. Then, 2 books were laid open, one for the signatures of the town council, and one for the marks of the Red Bluff elders. They would co-sign, a yearly ritual, a pledge to protect the water, and to protect each other, a new law, born not of a gavel, but of 2 hands and a promise. The old law had been judged. The territorial marshal had taken Pike and Sutter to the capital. The trial was swift. The evidence absolute, the telegram, the ledger, the testimony of Cade Rusk, and the confession of the young regulator whose leg had healed. A new judge, a man who feared no one. Passed sentence, not death, exile. Pike and Sutter were stripped of their titles and put on a wagon bound for the coast, to live out their days in the fog, as nameless as the men they had tried to break. And Luther Dragert, he vanished. His name was scraped from the mining maps. The Yellow Rock claim was ceded to the valley, a ghost of greed, left to be reclaimed by the wind and the juniper. His name was only a whisper now, a story to frighten new arrivals who looked at the spring with too much hunger in their eyes. The day ended. The light on the porch of the new ranch house was soft gold. Abram stepped out, his boots making a solid, comforting sound on the new wood. He took off his hat and set it on the porch rail. Anza came out, leaning against his side, her head finding the familiar, perfect space on his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her waist, holding her close, and they stood in the shared, comfortable silence of a husband and wife watching their land. From down by the creek, in the twilight, a sound drifted up to them. It was singing, the high, clear voices of children. They were playing by the head gate, singing a song they had made up. A song about the bell that fell, about the water that ran free. It was a song that had no blood in it, a song that had no hate. Abram looked down at Anza. She smiled, turning her face up to his. He kissed her, a long, slow kiss that tasted of contentment and of the future they had built from ash. The stories of this land are often writ in thunder, in the smoke of a six-gun or the blast of a gold mine. But the people of Juniper Ford, they tell a different tale. They say their valley was not won by a war, but by a truce. They say the land was not cleansed by fire, but was healed by water. And they will tell you that it all began on a single, frozen night, when a girl was left to die in rags before a locked church, and a lonely rancher, a man hollowed out by grief, did two simple, human things. He took off his hat, and he held out his hand, and with those two small acts, they changed the direction of the water, and the heart of a nation, forever. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below. Share your thoughts, and let's connect. Be sure to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and like this video. And if you want to support us further, please hit that hype button to help this story be heard by many more.